Hi, I'm Max Kaiser. This is the Kaiser Report, the show that takes you deep into the enchanted forest and then stabs you. Stacy.
Hey, Max, I just want to start with a chart, and this is the GE market cap going back to, the 80s. This is the 80s. This is the mid-90s. This is up to 2000, the spike, and the beginning of the hollowing out of the entire U.S. economy. In fact, if you look at a lot of big multinational American companies, you'll see that sort of pattern. This is the beginning of the share buybacks, the plundering of the assets that had been developed by the company for years. This is the beginning, of course, of financialization. Also happened, really kicked off in the mid-90s. That released some shareholder value for a moment, but then it's been plunging ever since. So it looks like GE is going to go the way of the dodo bird very soon.
You know, when this bull market is over, and that looks like it's fast approaching, that chart will be its epitaph. That's all you need to know. Okay, General Electric. There's an old saying on Wall Street, as General Motors goes, so goes America. Well, that's not true so much anymore. But with General Electric, it is true. It's one of the generals, General Electric, General Motors. And that is an exemplary chart that shows what happens when a company is engaged in pure financial engineering and accounting fraud for the benefit of the CEO and others of that ilk at the expense of shareholders, the expense of workers, the expense of the financial integrity of a nation. That's the death of a nation, financially engineered by Jeff Immelt and his predecessor, who I can't remember his name anymore, and the current guy.
Who is that guy? He was very famous. He wrote the book, and he's the one that set this in motion. Of course, he set this in motion, the spike up, by financial engineering. You know, it certainly excited shareholders who got all the dividends and extracted the wealth and of the company.
Yes, well, it created a whole group of billionaires. But those billions were created at the expense of a viable corporation, an integral part of the American economy that's now going bust because, remember, it was also bailed out in the 2008 crisis because General Electric is mostly profitable vis-a-vis its financial arm, its lending facility, its trading desk on Wall Street, like so many corporations. And in 2008, it was about to go bankrupt. The stock got down to the single digits. They cut the dividend, I believe.
$6, and now it's back down there.
It was bailed out, even though it should have been allowed to die then. But this is moral hazard, isn't it? Moral hazard is the Federal Reserve Bank comes along and bails out all the losers. It's anti-capitalist. It's anti-free market. It's doesn't even qualify as a meritocratically as communism. I mean, this is kleptocratism, where it's just a corporation with very wealthy CEOs, very well connected in Washington, putting a gun to the Federal Reserve's head, whether it's Ben Bernanke or Janet Yellen or Al Greenspan, and saying, print $15 trillion, or, the country's going to get whacked and 2 shots to the back, tap, tap, double tap.
Okay, we get it. We get the image. But, the fact is they will perhaps in the next headline find some hope for their own stock price. Defense contractors unfazed by Democratic gains as Republican deficit hawks lose influence. The companies that make jets, bombs, and aircraft carriers for the U.S. military are telling investors that the defense business will still be booming under a Democrat-controlled House of Representatives, even as a split Congress threatens a return to partisan gridlock. The defense contractors, namely Raytheon chief executive officer this past week, was telling shareholders that it's great news that the Democrats are in Congress because the money spigot will be open for them. They'll be getting a lot of money. Of course, in most parts of the world, it's not considered progressive or liberal sort of economics and politics to be bombing other people. But that's what they're suggesting, is that the Democrats are very happy to go rescue people around the world by killing them. 500,000 people dead in Yemen, even more dead in Iraq. All of these are supported by Democrats, and Raytheon is saying that this will be a good thing. His ads that they buy between Rachel Maddow's commercial breaks, those will do well in this economy.
A couple of good points there. I mean, the MSNBC crowd is funded by the military-industrial complex. So they're not, quote, state-run, but they're run by the Pentagon.
Well, they're run by Raytheon. They're financed by Raytheon. And Raytheon here is saying to their shareholders that Democrats, they're a political party who dispense taxpayer money. And they're saying that that taxpayer money, i.e. government funds, will flow to Raytheon, and Raytheon then continues to buy more ads on MSNBC. Thus, there's a middleman between Rachel Maddow's program and the U.S. Department of Defense and the government. But here...
Okay, Raytheon is the middleman between the outright...
but it's a private corporation.
Pentagon-run media outlet, MSNBC. There's a middleman called Raytheon. The second point there is a good one, that the Democrats are really the war party. Because they believe in infinite deficits, right? I mean, whereas the Republicans at least make a nodding reference to the fact that actually you need to balance the books and maybe it's a waste of money. They have a concept of hard money occasionally, which serves them well. Whereas the Democrats are always about there is no such thing as a limit to the amount of money we can print, and that extends to the war machine. And that's why Hillary Clinton is a warmonger, and the Democrats are easily conned into spending trillions of dollars in the defense industry, and why they control the House. Defense stocks went up. I mean, is there any clearer indication that the Democrats are the party of war?
This is the CEO of Raytheon, and I'm going to read some quotes from him, because the fact is 3 of the biggest deficit hawks in the House of Representatives, who are Republican Tea Party sort of guys, who did hold up previous budgets for defense spending. They wanted cuts in it. But this is the CEO speaking in Chicago. He said, one concern that we did have was relative to deficit hawks. Raytheon Chief Executive Thomas Kennedy said at the Robert W. Baird Industrial Conference in Chicago. And it turns out that most of the deficit hawks were in the House and on the Republican side. He went on to say that the Democratic takeover, quote, changes the equation relative to conversations around the national debt. The environment is actually nice now because it's settled. We know exactly what it is. The uncertainty has been taken out, and we know that we don't have this issue with the deficit hawks moving forward. So we're actually very, very optimistic.
Can I insert a little side note pertaining to a long-running contention I've had regarding this deficit hawk and military spending. It's interesting that the deficit hawks are Republican. And now with the Democrats in the House, they're going to go spending willy-nilly. Now, Donald Trump, the President of the United States, the one way to do an end run around this democratically controlled House that will spend another few $1 trillion of taxpayer money, go to foreign countries and kill babies, is to pull out of NATO, which is something, overtures again in France with Trump at the world leaders for the World War I centennial celebration made, again, the point that we don't want to fund NATO anymore, and that's going to be a huge saving. So the Democrats can fund Lockheed Martin, Marietta, and all the war contractors all they want. But Trump's saying, okay, we're just going to pull out of NATO.
One thing that has animated the Democratic base is these, the militarization of the border, which is a bad thing. But it's so bizarre to me as kind of an outside observer, this two-party system, is that they don't seem to care that what Raytheon actually makes, things like Tomahawk missiles, that they seem to think that they genuinely have no impact on the ground when they drop, that there's no dead people and dead infrastructure, annihilated infrastructure, that economies in the Middle East aren't ruined. It just seems a weird disconnect between the two sides, that they can care so much about one set of children on the border with Mexico, but not another set of children in, say, Yemen. It just seems a weird disconnect.
Well, that's a good point. It's hypocritical. According to Hillary Clinton's image of a tomahawk, it explodes and lollipops and sunshine come out, and the copy of the Constitution is passed around, and they join hands and sing Kumbaya.
Okay. But again, here's an investment letter that went out also right after the midterms, and this is from Jefferies Investment. And again, they see the Democrats holding the House as really good news for defense contractor shares. And just think about that for a bit, what that means and what they're saying. But I know most people won't because they're partisan. In a Wednesday morning note to investors entitled, "It's Always a Party, Regardless of Party," Jefferies investment analyst Sheila Calagio noted the 2006 midterm election in which Democrats seized the House at the height of the U.S. war in Iraq. Defense company shares climbed an average of 18% during that year. I guess you could expect defense shares to go forward. I know GE does do some defense work as well, so perhaps that will rescue the company for a bit, but of course with the money they make, they'll just buy back more shares and hollow out the company. And obviously you don't really have to compete if you're connected to the government. If you're a defense contractor, you don't really have to innovate. So I don't know if it will rescue GE in the long term, but certainly in the short term, you could have a boom thanks to the Democrats now willing to dispense money to go fight some wars.
General Electric is a scam coin that claims to be a utility coin, but in fact, it's an unregulated kleptocracy. And it probably will rebound on the death play, and it does pay a hefty dividend. And some hedge fund, activist hedge fund, what we used to call green mailers back in the 80s, will come in and build a big position, and it'll be the story, and they'll make some money. But remember, at the end of those profits are dead babies.
Actually, GE shares are down over 50% this year, and Ameritrade and other online brokers, discount brokers where retail investors go, and Robinhood and those sort of apps, were showing that retail investors were the number one buyers of GE all the way down, and now they're the number one sellers. So it doesn't make sense that they're selling to somebody, and it's probably hedge funds building up big positions and then lobbying Democrats to give GE more money.
Well, it's the end of the year, so you're going to sell your losers for tax losses. You have the so-called January effect. When the tax selling is over at some point in the next 8 weeks, there'll be a rebound. So if you want to make easy money on dead babies, buy GE on the tax selling loss low and play the January effect.
Well, I'm not sure that these were sophisticated investors doing their tax losses at the end of the year, but they held on all the way down, and now they're, the good thing is they will have tax losses to write off, perhaps against their Bitcoin gains that they sold.
Yeah, exactly. It's a winner all around. Well, we've got to take a break.